Willa Grayson had no idea the man she just offered a seat to would change her life. The wedding was already starting when she noticed the man standing at the back of the outdoor ceremony, scanning the rows with that slightly lost, slightly annoyed look people get when they're too polite to interrupt. Willa, sitting at the end of the third row with an empty white seat beside her, turned slightly and called out, "Hey, there's space here if you want." The man glanced over, surprised. He hesitated for half a second, then nodded and walked over, the late afternoon sun casting golden light across his sharp jawline and tailored suit. "Thanks," he said, settling into the chair. "Didn't expect it to be this packed." Willa offered a small smile. "It's a wedding. People love free cake and crying over other people's joy." He let out a quiet laugh, the sound low and warm. "Fair point." She didn't think anything of it. Just another guest. Another stranger in a sea of tulle and champagne flutes. He had a strong presence, broad shoulders, perfect posture, a watch that probably cost more than her car, but she kept her attention on the bride walking down the aisle. She didn't need distractions. Especially not the gorgeous kind. After the ceremony, the man stayed beside her as the crowd moved toward the cocktail hour under a canopy of fairy lights and soft jazz. "I'm Archer," he said, holding out a hand. "Willa," she replied, shaking it. His palm was warm, firm, and lingered just a second longer than necessary. "You here for the bride or the groom?" "Bride. We used to work together." "You." "Groom. Old college friend." They stood awkwardly for a beat. Then Willa, who hated silence more than she hated uncomfortable heels, blurted, "You want to grab a drink?" He looked at her like she'd surprised him again, then smiled. "I'd like that." The next hour passed faster than Willa expected. Archer was funny, but in a dry, clever way. He didn't brag or name drop, and he didn't treat her like she was just someone to pass the time with until the main course. He was actually listening. They joked about the over-the-top flower arrangements, guessed which guests were secretly dating, and debated whether the cake would be vanilla or red velvet. When the reception began, Willa assumed they'd drift off into the crowd. But he appeared at her side again, holding out a chair for her at the dinner table. "Mind if I sit here?" She blinked. "Didn't think you'd want to be stuck with me all night." "I thought the same about you," he said easily. "But here we are." Dinner turned into dancing. Dancing turned into easy laughter and Archer spinning her under twinkling lights as a live band played something jazzy. "You're good at this," she said as he twirled her again. "No, you just make me look better." She laughed, cheeks flushed from the wine and the way he was looking at her. Later, when people were drifting off, Archer walked her out to the valet line. She wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Let me call you a car," he said. "I'm good. I drove." He frowned slightly. "You sure? It's late." "I'm sure." He hesitated. "Can I see you again?" Willa blinked. "You want to?" "Yeah," he said, stuffing his hands in his pockets. "I really do." She tilted her head at him. "Aren't you one of those mysterious types who disappear after one charming night?" He grinned. "Not tonight." She pulled a pen from her clutch and scribbled her number on his palm. "Then don't waste it," she said. He looked down at the number like it was something valuable. "I won't." Willa didn't expect much. Men like Archer didn't usually chase women like her. She worked in nonprofit development, barely made enough to pay rent, and had a tendency to overshare when she was nervous. But she couldn't stop smiling the whole drive home. Archer called the next day. Their first date was dinner at a rooftop restaurant Willa had never even heard of. The waiter addressed Archer by name. They brought out a bottle of wine without him ordering it. And when she glanced at the menu, she almost choked. "You know this place is, like, ridiculously expensive, right?" He raised an eyebrow. "Is it?" She gave him a look. He smiled. "Don't worry. I've got it." She wanted to argue, but something about the tone in his voice, firm, steady, made her stop. The food was perfect, the view even more so. Archer didn't talk about work much, and when she asked, he brushed it off with a vague, real estate stuff. Boring. But he asked her questions that made her feel seen. Really seen. No one had ever asked about the nonprofit she worked for and actually cared about the answer. After dinner, he walked her to her car. I had a really good time, he said. Me too. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. His kiss was unhurried and warm, and when he stepped back, she was breathless. I'm gonna call you tomorrow, he said. And he did. Again and again. In the weeks that followed, Archer took her to places she'd never been: private art showings, boat dinners, a weekend getaway to Napa that felt like something out of a movie. He never flaunted his wealth, but it was there in the way he never hesitated to tip big, the way restaurant managers greeted him personally, the way his suits fit like they were made for him. Still, he never talked about it. Willa didn't ask. Part of her didn't want to know. She liked the way things were. Easy. Safe. Like maybe she'd stumbled into something magical and didn't want to break the spell. But one night, about a month after the wedding, she was at his penthouse, a place so sleek and modern it looked like it belonged in a magazine, when she found herself staring out at the skyline and asked, "Who are you, really?" He was pouring wine in the kitchen but paused. "What do you mean?" She turned to face him. "You say your job is boring, but clearly you're not just flipping condos. You live in a place with a freaking private elevator." He looked at her for a long moment, then walked over and handed her the glass. "You're not wrong," he said quietly. "My company builds and owns commercial properties. Hotels. Office towers. That kind of thing." She blinked. "Wait. You own them?" "Some of them. I run the company." Her mouth parted, but no words came out. His voice was calm. "I didn't want to lead with it. People act weird when they know." She gave him a long look. "Billionaire weird?" He gave a sheepish nod. "Yeah." Willa took a long sip of wine. "Okay. Okay? You're still the same guy who danced with me under fairy lights and asked if I thought the cake would be red velvet." He laughed. "It was red velvet, by the way." "I know. I had 2 slices." He stepped closer. "This doesn't change anything for you?" She tilted her head. "Should it? You'd be surprised how often it does." She set her glass down. "I'm not impressed by your bank account, Archer. I'm impressed because you've never made me feel small. And that's worth more than any rooftop dinner." He didn't say anything. He just pulled her into his arms and held her like he'd been waiting a long time to do it. And Willa, for once, let herself believe something real was happening. Something she hadn't seen coming the day she offered a stranger a seat beside her. Willa hadn't planned on introducing Archer to her world. She lived in a walk-up apartment in a neighborhood where the corner store guy knew her by name, and the barista sometimes gave her free muffins when they were about to close. Her life wasn't curated or glossy. It was real, a little noisy, and definitely not designed for men who owned buildings. But one afternoon, he asked to see where she worked. "You don't have to pretend to be interested in donor outreach," Willa said, stuffing papers into a canvas tote while trying not to knock over the fan that served as their only air conditioner. "I'm not pretending," Archer said, leaning against the doorframe of her office. "I want to see what matters to you. That's what you do when you care about someone." Her fingers froze mid-zip. He didn't blink. She cleared her throat. "All right then. But don't say I didn't warn you about the flickering lights." The nonprofit's office was a converted brownstone stuffed with desks, outdated monitors, and more coffee mugs than employees. Archer ducked slightly as he stepped inside, his height at odds with the low ceilings and narrow hallways. "This is our conference room," Willa said, gesturing at a mismatched table surrounded by chairs that had seen better days. "We hold board meetings here, and sometimes someone brings donuts." He ran his hand lightly over the scratched wood. "It has character." She gave him a sideways glance. "That's a nice way of saying it looks like a flea market exploded." He grinned. No. It looks like people here work hard and care. She didn't expect the warmth that bloomed in her chest. Later, as they walked through the nearby park to get lunch from her favorite food truck, he asked, "What made you choose this? You could have done anything." Willa bit into her sandwich, then shrugged. "I grew up watching my mom work 3 jobs. She still volunteers twice a week at a shelter. I guess I wanted to be part of something that actually helps people, not just talks about it." "That's rare," he said, studying her. She didn't look away. "What about you? You ever wonder what you'd be doing if you weren't running a real estate empire?" He hesitated. "Sometimes. But the pressure started early. My dad built the company from nothing. When he died, I promised I'd grow it, make it something he'd be proud of." She nodded slowly. "You don't talk about him much." "He was complicated," Archer said, folding his wrapper. "Brilliant. Demanding. The kind of man who taught me to negotiate a multi-million-dollar deal before I turned 20 but never said he was proud of me." Willa didn't respond right away. Then, "That must have been heavy." He nodded once. "Still is." For a while, they sat on the bench, watching a kid chase pigeons while a nearby saxophone player added a soundtrack to the quiet. "I like knowing this stuff about you," Willa said eventually. He glanced at her, surprised. "Most people don't want to hear about the dark parts. Most people are cowards." He laughed, but it was softer this time, like something in him was loosening. Things shifted after that. They spent more time together, but it wasn't always champagne and skyline views. Archer came to her game night with friends and lost terribly at charades. He helped her carry groceries up 4 flights when her arms were full. Once, when her old radiator hissed nonstop, he sat cross-legged on her floor and tried to fix it with a wrench and a YouTube video. He never made her feel like she had to impress him, which only made her care more. But the deeper they went, the more Willa noticed the cracks. He'd get texts that darkened his expression. He'd cancel plans last minute with vague explanations. And when she asked about his past relationships, he shut down. "I don't do well with complications," he'd said one night, pouring himself a drink in silence. "Do you think I'm complicated?" she'd asked. He looked at her for a long moment before answering. "No. You're the first thing that's made sense in a long time." She didn't push that night. But the question sat with her. Still, they kept moving forward. He whisked her away to a weekend in Montauk, where they stayed in a secluded house with a fireplace and a view of the ocean. They cooked together, argued playfully over whether pancakes should include blueberries, and fell asleep on the couch watching old black and white films. On the drive back, she rested her head against the window and said, "I could get used to this." Archer glanced at her, one hand on the wheel. "Yeah? Yeah." But just when Willa started to believe they were heading towards something solid, Archer began to pull away. It started with missed calls. Then shorter answers. Then a night when she showed up at his penthouse unannounced, and he answered the door looking like he hadn't slept in days. "Are you okay?" she asked, stepping inside. He ran a hand through his hair, the tension in his shoulders unmistakable. "Work's been a lot. You always say that when something's wrong." He didn't respond. "I'm not asking for your bank statements, Archer. But if we're doing this, I need honesty." He turned away from her, staring out at the skyline. "There's a deal I'm trying to close. It's bigger than anything I've done before. The board's divided. I've got investors breathing down my neck." "Then let me help you," she said quietly. He turned back to her, surprised. "How?" "I don't know. Distract you. Feed you. Let you vent. Something." For the first time in days, he smiled, really smiled. "You already do." They stood in silence for a moment before he reached for her hand. "I'm sorry I've been distant," he said. "I've never had this before. Something that feels real. And I'm terrified of screwing it up." "You will," she said, stepping closer. "And so will I. But if we're honest, we'll survive it." He pulled her into his arms. You make me want to survive it. But the next day, things unraveled. Willa was at work when the news hit. A headline on a financial blog, followed by a cascade of articles. Archer Hale faces allegations of hostile takeover deal. The story claimed he was trying to acquire a beloved local hotel chain through backdoor tactics. The public outcry was immediate. She stared at the screen, her lunch forgotten. He hadn't mentioned any of this. Her phone rang a few minutes later. Archer. Please don't believe everything you read, he said the moment she answered. You didn't think to tell me? I didn't want to drag you into it. Well, now I am. There was a pause. Come to the office tonight. Let me explain. She almost said no. But something in his voice, tired, raw, made her say, Fine. When she arrived, his assistant led her up to the top floor of the Hale Global Tower. The office was sleek, all glass and steel, but Archer looked completely out of place, his jacket tossed on a chair, his tie undone, his eyes shadowed. The articles are only half right, he said, waving her inside. Yes, we were negotiating a buyout. But I didn't want to gut the hotels. I wanted to restore them. My father proposed the takeover 10 years ago. It never went through. I revived the idea because I thought it could work if done ethically. My board disagreed. And someone leaked it to the press to make it look like I'm the villain. And are you? Willa asked quietly. He met her eyes. No. She studied him, her pulse thudding. Then tell the truth. Publicly. That's not how this works. Then maybe it should be. He looked at her like she just proposed burning the whole building down. I've spent years protecting this company's image, he said. But maybe it's time I stop hiding behind it. She stepped closer. You don't need to be perfect, Archer. You just need to be real. He reached for her hand, his voice low. You make me want to be. But outside, the city wasn't waiting. Headlines kept spinning. Blogs speculated. Investors panicked. And Willa was about to discover that loving someone like Archer meant stepping into a storm you couldn't control. Because when men like him fall, they don't do it quietly. The first time Archer Hale made a public statement in defense of himself, he did it because Willa asked him to. Not because his board pressured him. Not because the press demanded it. But because she looked him in the eye, standing in his glass-walled office with her chin lifted and her voice steady, and said, If you want people to believe in you, you have to show them who you really are. So he did. He held a press conference 3 days later, not in some sterile hotel ballroom, but in the historic main lobby of the very hotel chain he was accused of tearing down. The room still bore the faded elegance of its former glory, gold leaf moldings, scuffed marble floors, and a chandelier that no longer worked. When Willa arrived, she stood at the back, unnoticed by the reporters crowding the front. Archer stepped up to the podium in a navy suit, no tie, his shirt collar open. For the first time since the story broke, he looked calm. I'm not here to deny the facts, he began. We were in talks to acquire the Halston Hotel Group. But the version of that story you've read, the one where I planned to gut the buildings for condos and fire entire staffs, that's not the truth. He paused just long enough for the murmurs to rise, then fall again. My father tried to buy this chain years ago. His plan was to demolish most of the properties. I disagreed with that then, and I disagree with it now. These hotels are part of the city's heritage. They deserve restoration, not destruction. Cameras flashed. Pens scratched against pads. But Willa only watched him. I've spent my career expanding what my father built, Archer continued. But growth without purpose means nothing. If this deal goes through, it will be on my terms. Preservation. Sustainability. And jobs maintained for every employee who wants to stay. I'm not here to erase history. I'm here to rebuild it. When he stepped back from the microphone, the room erupted not in applause, but in questions. He answered every one of them. Willa left before he could see her. She didn't need to. That night, he showed up at her door with no warning. I didn't know if you'd come, she said, opening it. I didn't know how to stay away. He stepped inside and took her in his arms without another word. She didn't pull back. Afterwards, they lay on the worn couch in her apartment, the lights off, the hum of the city floating in through the window. Thank you, he said against her shoulder. You did that, she murmured. Not me. I wouldn't have without you. She didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. But even as things settled publicly, articles softening, investors calming, Willa felt something shifting beneath the surface. A tension that had nothing to do with headlines. Archer wasn't sleeping. She noticed the way he stared at nothing when he thought she wasn't looking, jaw tight, fingers flexing like he was trying to hold something together. One evening, they had dinner at his place. He barely touched his food. You're somewhere else, she said quietly. He set his fork down. The board wants me to step aside until the acquisition clears. Her breath caught. Are you going to? I don't know, he admitted. They think the press made me too polarizing. That I've become a liability. That's ridiculous. You told the truth. I did, he said. But truth doesn't always make people comfortable. It makes them nervous. She reached for his hand. What do you want to do? He looked at her like that was the hardest question of all. I want to fix this. I want to keep building something that matters. But I also want peace. And I don't know if I get to have both. Maybe not right now, she said. But eventually. His eyes searched hers. For what, she didn't know. But he kissed her like he needed to believe her. Days passed. Then a week. Archer pulled back again, not with avoidance, but with silence. He became harder to reach, not in presence, but in spirit. He still called. Still showed up. But something fundamental in him had folded inward. Willa felt it like a cold draft under a locked door. She tried to distract herself with work, but even that became complicated. Her boss informed her their funding was in danger. A major grant had fallen through. They needed a miracle or a donor who could plug the gap. That night, she stood in Archer's kitchen, clutching a glass of water, debating whether to say anything. You're quiet, he said, watching her. I didn't want to bring this up, she said. But my nonprofit's in trouble. We lost the grant. It's bad. He set his drink down. How bad? We might have to shut down programs. Maybe more. He was already reaching for his phone. Let me wire something. No. She cut in. That's not why I told you. He froze. I don't want your money, she said. I just needed to say it out loud to someone who'd get it. He put the phone down slowly. I'm not trying to fix you, Willa. I know. But right now, I feel like everyone's trying to fix me or use me. You're the only one who doesn't. His eyes softened. That goes both ways. But the next day, a donation hit the nonprofit's account, anonymous, untraceable, and exactly the amount they needed to stay afloat. Willa knew. She didn't say anything. Not until she saw him again. Why did you do it? She asked, standing in the middle of his penthouse, her voice low. He didn't pretend he didn't know what she meant. Because I can, he said. And because it matters to you. That's not the point. It is to me. She stared at him. I didn't want to be something you fixed, Archer. I wanted to be someone you stood beside. I wasn't trying to fix you, he said. I was trying to give you space to keep doing what you love. Isn't that what you've been doing for me? She took a breath, then another. You didn't even let me fight for it. I didn't want you to have to fight alone. They stood there, either moving. Finally, she said, You scare me sometimes. Why? Because you make it easy to fall. And I don't know if I'll land safely. He stepped forward, slowly. I'm not going to let you fall alone. But what if you fall first? His expression changed, then something raw breaking through the calm. I already did. She didn't answer. She just reached up, fingers tangling in his shirt, and pulled him into her. That night she didn't sleep. Neither did he. They lay in the dark, side by side, breathing the same air and carrying the same fear. In the morning, he was gone before she woke. A note on the counter. Had to meet with the board. I'll call you. He didn't. Not that day. Not the next. Willa waited. Not because she was weak, but because she believed in what they had built. Until 3 days later, when she stood in front of a bakery downtown and saw Archer through the window with a woman. Tall. Blonde. Elegant. Not touching, but close enough to be whispering. Close enough to laugh at something only they shared. Willa didn't go inside. She didn't call him. Instead, she walked the long way home, her chest hollow and her eyes dry. That night, her apartment felt too quiet. And for the first time since she offered him that seat at the wedding, she wondered if everything they'd built had only ever been temporary. Because maybe love wasn't enough when it came with a storm. Willa didn't cry. She wanted to. She wanted to collapse on her kitchen floor, let the weight of the last few weeks crush her, and sob until the hollow in her chest faded. But instead, she stood barefoot in her apartment, staring at the single daffodil Archer had left in a glass on her window ledge days ago, and felt nothing. She hadn't heard from him. Not once. Not after seeing him with that woman. Not after the silence stretched from hours into days. And she hadn't reached out either. Because whatever they'd built, whatever they'd whispered in the quiet of her apartment, or promised with their eyes across crowded rooms, it clearly hadn't been strong enough to survive outside the world they'd made for themselves. The ache didn't bloom all at once. It simmered. A dull, persistent hum under her skin as she moved through her days. At work, she dove into projects with a kind of manic energy, organizing a fundraiser with the urgency of someone trying to outrun silence. At night, she left her phone in another room so she wouldn't check it. But the ache refused to go. It waited for her in moments she didn't expect. In the way she paused at the crosswalk near his building. In the way her fingers hovered over the playlist he made for their drive back from Montauk. In the way she couldn't bring herself to throw out the bottle of wine he brought over and never opened. Then the invitation arrived. It came in a thick white envelope with her name handwritten in navy ink. The return address read Hale Global. Inside was a single card, embossed with silver. The Halston Grand Reopening Gala. Please join us in celebrating a new era of legacy, vision, and preservation. And at the bottom, in smaller script, a private moment. A public promise. She stared at the words for a long time. Willa didn't want to go. She didn't want to parade through a crowd of his world's elite, dressed like she belonged, pretending she wasn't still trying to understand how everything had unraveled without warning. But she also knew herself. She knew she'd regret it if she didn't stand in that room, if she didn't look Archer Hale in the eye and demand answers. She pulled out the navy dress she'd bought months ago and never worn. Clean lines. No sparkle. Just enough elegance to keep her head held high. The Halston looked nothing like it had the first time she saw it. The marble floors gleamed. The chandelier blazed with restored crystal light. The air buzzed with the sound of champagne flutes and live string music. But none of it mattered. Because the moment she stepped inside, Archer saw her. He crossed the room like it belonged to no one but them. You came, he said, voice low. You invited me, she replied. I wasn't sure you'd read it. I read everything you send me. Especially the things you don't explain. He studied her face. I deserve that. You do. I want to tell you what happened. Then do it. He glanced toward the far wall, where guests laughed and posed beneath the restored hotel emblem. Not here. Come with me. She hesitated, but followed him through a side corridor and into a small, velvet-lined room with a private bar and no windows. I didn't cheat on you, he said the moment the door closed. She blinked. That's a direct opening. I need you to know it. The woman you saw, her name's Evelyn. She's my company's legal counsel. She used to date my brother. Willa crossed her arms. She was touching your arm like she knew you better than that. She does. She's known me since I was 15. She helped me get through my father's estate. She's the one who told me to step away from the board temporarily. She's also the one who told me I was falling apart trying to do everything alone. You could have told me that. I should have. Then why didn't you? He moved closer, not touching her. Because I didn't want you to see me like that. Not when you believed in me more than I believed in myself. I broke down, Willa. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't think. I started second-guessing everything, whether I could lead, whether I deserved you, whether I could be enough for any of it. You thought disappearing would fix that? I thought if I stepped back, if I gave you space, maybe you wouldn't be pulled into the wreckage. But I already was. I chose to be. You just walked away anyway. He exhaled, jaw tight. I know. And I hate myself for it. Willa looked at him, really looked, and something in her shifted. His hair was neater than usual, his tucks tailored to perfection, but there was a fragility in his eyes she hadn't seen before. Not weakness. Honesty. I didn't come here to forgive you, she said. I didn't ask you to. I came because I needed to see if the man I danced with under string lights still existed. He stepped closer, voice quiet. He never left. I'm not interested in a version of you that only shows up when it's easy. Then let me show up when it's hard. She hesitated. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Not a ring. Something else. I had this made the week after Montauk. I didn't know when I'd give it to you. I just knew I wanted to. He opened it. Inside was a necklace. A slender gold chain with a single charm, a tiny brass key. It's the original key to this hotel, he said. Before the renovations. Before the politics. It's a symbol. Of legacy. Of something worth unlocking. She stared at it. I want to build something with you, he said. Not just projects or properties. A life. One where you don't have to wonder if I'll be there. One where I earn your trust every single day. She swallowed. You've hurt me. I know. And this won't fix everything. I wouldn't expect it to. She looked up at him. But I still love you. His breath caught. I shouldn't, she continued. You disappeared. You shut me out. You made me feel like I didn't matter. I was scared, he said. But not of you. Of being seen. You've always seen through the walls I built, and I didn't know how to let that happen without losing control. You don't need control with me, Archer. You just need truth. He nodded. Then here's mine. I want you. Not as someone I visit in between meetings or hide from the press. I want you in my mornings. In my decisions. In my world. She reached up and took the necklace from the box. He stepped forward and helped her fasten it around her neck. When she looked up, his lips were inches from hers. I love you, he said. Not because you made me better, but because you made me honest. She kissed him. Right there, in the quiet of the velvet room behind a grand ballroom, Willa kissed the man who had broken her heart and was now asking to rebuild it. But this time together. Later that night, Archer pulled her onto the ballroom floor as the orchestra shifted into a slow, sweeping waltz. The crowd parted for them without instruction, as if they knew this moment didn't belong to anyone else. Willa laid her head against his chest. You know, she murmured, I only offered you that seat because you looked lost. He smiled into her hair. I was. And now? Now I'm exactly where I'm meant to be. The chandelier cast golden light across the room as they danced. And this time, there were no secrets. Only a woman who had once offered a stranger a seat, and a billionaire who had taken it, and in doing so, found the one thing he hadn't realized he was missing. Love. Real. Entire. Unshakable. And it was only just beginning. Willa stood in front of the mirror in Archer's penthouse, adjusting the delicate gold key that rested just above her collarbone. The necklace caught the morning light as it filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a faint shimmer across her skin. She hadn't woken up in her apartment in nearly a week. Behind her, Archer was buttoning his shirt, his hair still damp from the shower. "You keep staring at it," he said. She met his gaze in the mirror. "It feels like the first thing someone's given me that means something without asking anything in return." He walked over, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. "It's yours. Always." Willa leaned into him. "So, what happens now?" "We live," he said. "With less hiding and more showing up." She turned to face him. "And the board? They voted yesterday. I stay. Full control. Evelyn negotiated the terms herself. I think she's still hoping I'll name a building after her. And you? I want to name something else after you." She laughed but narrowed her eyes. "If you name a high-rise after me, I swear, not a high-rise. Something better." He kissed her forehead, then her cheek, then finally her lips, slow and unhurried. "But you'll have to wait for it." In the weeks that followed the gala, Archer kept his word. He didn't disappear. He didn't retreat. He showed up. For dinners. For late-night phone calls. For the ordinary moments that mattered more than galas or champagne. He came to Willa's office during lunch breaks, sometimes bringing takeaway sushi, sometimes just bringing himself. Her co-workers, at first stunned, quickly warmed to him, especially after he quietly offered to fund the nonprofit's youth mentorship program without attaching his name. She declined the offer, but he didn't argue. He simply helped her draft a pitch that landed them a meeting with a foundation she'd been trying to reach for nearly a year. They began carving out a rhythm, one that didn't rely on extravagance or grand settings. They cooked together more well, Willa cooked, and Archer learned to chop vegetables without almost losing a fingertip. They argued once over who got to pick the movie, and again when he tried to reorganize her kitchen cabinets. Logically. But each time, they found their way back, not because it was easy, but because they chose to. One Friday evening, Willa arrived at Archer's penthouse to find the lights dimmed, soft piano playing in the background, and a table set on the balcony with thick candles flickering against the skyline. She raised an eyebrow. "This looks suspiciously romantic." He grinned. "I thought I'd cook for you." She walked over to the table. "You ordered in, didn't you?" "I absolutely did. But I plated it myself." As they ate, the city stretched out below them, glittering and alive. "You know," Willa said, picking at the last of her pasta, "I used to think men like you didn't exist. Charming, powerful, and devastatingly handsome?" "No," she said, nudging him with her foot. "Men who say they'll change and actually do." He was quiet for a moment. "I didn't change. I just stopped pretending I didn't need something real." She looked at him, heart thudding. "What are you thinking?" He met her gaze. "That I'm done waiting." He stood, reached into his jacket pocket, and pulled something out. But it wasn't a ring. It was a folded piece of paper. He handed it to her, and she opened it slowly. It was a deed. To a property. An old building downtown she'd once pointed out on a walk, saying it would make the perfect community arts center if someone ever saved it. Her eyes widened. "You bought this?" "I did. And I want you to run it, design it, shape it into whatever you think this city needs. It'll be fully funded, independent from Hale Global, and completely yours." Her throat tightened. "Why would you?" "Because I believe in what you do. Because I love you. And because I want to build a life with someone who dreams bigger than me and isn't afraid to drag me along." She stood slowly, heart racing, eyes stinging. "You really want that?" He stepped closer. "I want everything with you." She let out a shaky breath. "Then ask me." He reached into his pocket again, pulled out a small velvet box, and opened it. Inside was a ring. A single round diamond set in a band that looked as timeless as it did simple. "I wanted to give you the key to something that matters," he said. But now, I want to ask you to be the heart of everything I build. Will you marry me? Tears blurred her vision. You already know the answer. Say it anyway. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms as the city roared beneath them. They didn't need a rooftop or a chandelier or a headline for it to be real. They had each other. Fully. Finally. 6 months later, they stood in the very hotel that had once been the center of their unraveling, now transformed into a place of celebration. The ceremony was small. Just family, a few friends, and the people who'd walked with them through the hardest parts. Willa's mother sat in the front row, dabbing her eyes. Evelyn gave a toast that made everyone laugh. And when Archer kissed Willa under an arch of white gardenias, the world outside ceased to matter. The reception was filled with dancing, laughter, and enough cake to fuel a small village. But the moment that stayed with Willa happened quietly, after it all. They stood on the balcony of their new home, an old brownstone Archer had renovated not to impress, but to create space that felt like both of them. She wore a white silk robe and held her heels in one hand. He stood behind her, arms wrapped around her waist. You still think I'm the guy who looked lost at a wedding? He asked. She turned in his arms, smiling. No. I think you were always the guy who just needed someone to see you. I think you were the person who taught me how. Outside, the city hummed with life, but inside, they were their own universe. A week later, Willa unlocked the doors to the new Community Arts Center for the first time. The place was perfect, clean lines, open spaces, and a rooftop garden that overlooked the city. Archer showed up with fresh coffee and a donation check from a new sponsor he'd quietly introduced her to. She shook her head. You're impossible. I'm invested. You're something. I'm yours. That night, they walked home hand in hand, the gold key resting just above her heart, the ring catching the streetlight. They had faced storms, silence, and shadows. And still, they had chosen each other. Over and over again. Always.